Hello, today I'd like to talk to you about achieving an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're going to just make a small sample, a little bit like a test sample. If you're a knitter, you'll know that you do little tension squares and things like that. So this is our quilting 1/4 inch sample, just to see how we're going. So I've got 10 strips of fabric and I'm going to cut the strips of fabric at 1.5 inches wide. I need some sort of measuring tool. It could be your regular tape measure, but I've got a little gizmo thing here that I'm going to use. And it's all about knowing how to use your sewing machine and getting that accuracy with your machine. So just to show you what I've done, I've cut some 1.5 inch wide strips, and I've just cut them 4 inches long, really for convenience. And I'm just going to sew them together to show you how to do that. Now, most machines these days have the ability to have a 1/4 inch foot, and I have a 1/4 inch foot on my machine here. There are different types of 1/4 inch feet. I know there are some that have like a little guide at the end that when you slide your fabric in, it will butt up against that guide to give you your 1/4 inch. The 1/4 inch they're talking about is the distance from your needle where the stitching is going to occur to the side of your foot where the edge of your fabric will sit. So you can have a look here to see how that's going to work, and I can see, I'm not sure if you can, but I can see that where my needle is exactly 1/4 inch away from the edge of the foot. So if you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, your machine most likely will have the ability to change the needle position, usually at a press of a button. But if you're going to do that, you must make sure you've got the right foot on that will allow the needle to go down in a different position, and so that you can set it by measuring a 1/4 inch away from where you're going to sew to the edge of your foot. The edge of the foot is quite a good guide. If all of those things are not possible, you could stick a piece of masking tape or something that will be easily removable onto your plate there, a 1/4 inch away from where the needle goes in. So I'm just going to sew here. Now, what we're after is, it is an accurate 1/4 inch seam that we want, but in actual fact, we really want to do what they call a scant 1/4 inch. And this is because when you fold the fabric over, in the fold, just another thread or so disappears and takes up some of the measurement. So a scant 1/4 inch is just on the underside, just a thread's width probably of your fabric, on the underside of a 1/4 inch. So if you're reasonably confident, you could just chain piece these. And then I'm going to press each one before I join it to the next one. I find that pressing seams as I go helps enormously on the finished product. So I'll just do a couple of these here to show you. So I'm going to press that seam. Again, I press from the right side, so I'll lay one of the strips down and just run the iron over that. And I'll do another one. So they're sitting nice and flat at the moment, and now I can actually check that seam allowance. My thread's probably not very strong for you to see, and I'm seeing that that is a pretty precise 1/4 inch seam there. It's sitting just that whisker under the 1/4 inch, which is exactly what I was after. So now I would go back to the machine and I would keep sewing until I've got all 10 of my strips together. And again, I'm pressing as I go, because I just know that pressing as I go helps the end result enormously. And I would just continue on like that. Well, you don't need to watch me do all 10 strips. What I can show you is one that I have just done previously that has got all 10 strips. So now the strips were cut at 1.5 inches. So when we take in our 1/4 inch seam either side, that's going to be a 1 inch strip that we're left with. So this whole piece of 10 strips, because I've still got a 1/4 inch at each end that hasn't been sewn in yet, this should measure 10.5 inches. So when I lay it on my board here, or against a ruler, whatever it is that you're using to measure, tape measure, I'm finding that in actual fact, from this end to here is 10.5 inches exactly. So this is a really good result. Now sometimes it takes a little bit of practice because you need to get your eye trained to do your 1/4 inch, but it's worth doing. And now you're going to say, well, why does it have to be so accurate? Because sometimes it doesn't. If you're just making up a set of blocks, you can trim a set of blocks probably to an exact size if you're finding that your seam allowance isn't quite the same throughout or the same as the intention was when the pattern was written. But there are times when it matters that things are just the right size. One of those times would be if you were doing a medallion style quilt. Now a medallion style quilt is usually one that starts in the centre and is built out with borders. And very often some of the borders can be pieced, in which case, like they are here, this is a pieced border, this is a pieced border, and the very outside border is a pieced border. Well, if you're piecing, these need to fit the other borders. So a level of accuracy is really helpful in trying to achieve things like that. So pieced borders require reasonably accurate piecing, having started off with your centre part of your quilt being accurate enough that your piece borders will fit it. And I can just show you another quilt where I have used a pieced border, and again it required the centre part, the blocks and things being accurate. So that this piecing along the borders here will all fit. So I hope that's helped you a little bit. So just remember that you need it to be a scant 1/4 inch, press as you go, and get used to your sewing machine and where that 1/4 inch really sits. Thank you.